Good evening, everybody. We're here at Green River, Utah, the John Wesley Powell Museum for our Southeastern RAC. I'd like to welcome everybody out. Thank you for coming. Let's start with, we'll introduce and go through a roll on our RAC members. I understand we have some joining us online. Just sound out, say hello, raise your hand, whatever you feel like doing as I call your name. Scoot Flannery, Eric Luke, Darren Olson, Stephen Duke, Brad Richmond, Lynn Sitterud, Kirk Player, I don't see Kirk online, Todd Thorne. There's Todd online, Sunshine Brosey. I see you.
I'm here.
Dana Truman. I believe Joe Sacco is going to be absent tonight. Charles Fisher.
I'm present.
There. And Justin Ivins. Okay, so he's not able to make it. All right. Okay. That's everybody. Well, welcome to the public and the people that are joining us online. Welcome to everybody that's here in person. Also online, we have Kyle Maynard from the Attorney General's office. He'll be able to answer any legal questions we might have. Okay, before we get into our agenda, we'll just go through the way it'll work with our action items. We'll go through the presentation, maybe a brief overview. We'll have questions from the RAC and then questions from the audience. We'll go and then comments from the audience, and we'll go through any online comments we had. And after that, we'll go to comments from the RAC and then into our motions and voting. As you come up with questions, make it brief and make it a question. If you come up in the question period, it's got to be a question. If it's not a question, if you come up, we'll save comments and opinions for the comment period. It's just if you have a question, we'll keep it brief. And then in the comment period, you'll have 3 minutes, at the microphone to state your case. And if we end up having to go over a little bit with a further clarification, we can always make a little bit of allowance for that. With that, we'll go to the approval of the agenda and the minutes. Any questions or comments or discussion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the agenda for the meeting and also the minutes of the last meeting.
We have a motion from Eric. Do we have a second? Is that Lynn?
Yeah.
Okay, the second by Lynn. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor? Online, raise your hands or sing out.
In favor.
Todd,
In favor.
In favor.
looks like unanimous. Okay, now we'll move on to the Wildlife Board update. And that was, oh crud, I forget the date now. Yeah, dyslexia, dementia, all kinds of stuff kicking in here, man. Okay, so the board met to discuss buck deer and bull elk pronghorn numbers, once in a lifetime stuff, and antlerless. On the buck deer, the board voted unanimously to accept the division's recommendations with regard to permit numbers. And also with the buck deer, there was discussion on the lifetime licenses and how they're allocated. That was primarily motions out of this RAC and the Southern RAC that wanted that looked into. And the one thing that came up in the meeting is that is codified the way that is done right now. It's in state code. So any changes that have to be made will likely have to be done legislatively. And then the bull elk and pronghorn, the board, there was a motion to increase the beaver bull permits from 51 to 76. That was tie 3-3 and broke by the chair and the motion failed. Then there was another motion to increase the beaver tags from 51 to 65 and that passed 5-1. And a motion to accept the balance of the pronghorn and elk was unanimous. Once in a lifetime motion on those hunts, there was a motion to increase the North Slope goat tags to 2 on the archery hunt and to decrease the number of Rocky Mountain Bighorn tags on Jack Creek to 2 rams. The balance of the recommendations were passed unanimously. The antlerless recommendations were passed unanimously by the board, and the CWMU antlerless was passed 4 in favor, and there were 2 abstentions because of conflict of interest. And that, I believe, covers that. And announcement, May 26th to June 16th is the antlerless drawing period, application period. And with that, we will go on to our regional update, and that is Chris Wood, our regional supervisor.
Good evening. I turned it on. Are you proud of me? I remembered. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your service and volunteering to be on this advisory council and for the time and effort you put into hearing recommendations and public comments and voting on motions. I'll just give a quick update of what we're doing in the region. Our habitat section has been pretty busy. This time of year, we're also hiring all of our seasonals and have a bunch of field work for them, especially in our habitat section as we have a bunch of properties, Gordon Creek, Nash Wash, where we do a lot of land management, fence work, and in some areas we farm and exercise our water rights and irrigate and things like that. Spray weeds, that always keeps us busy. We did have a field tour on Friday at the Sego Trailhead. It was a really good field tour. Ourselves and backcountry hunters and anglers, SFW, Kevin Albrecht from the Wildlife Board was there. Some staff from DWR. Unfortunately, Sitla, who owns the property the trailhead is on, was not able to attend, but we came up with some really good ideas on expanding that trailhead, making it, Kent was there too. Did I leave anybody out, Kent? Yeah, Troy Justin, yep. And Trish Hadeen with Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. But we came up with some really good ideas that we're going to formalize in the next week or two, submit to Sitla for their review and hopefully approval. But it'll consist of changing some of the gates at the trailhead and where you actually enter in at, putting up some kiosks so people understand the etiquette of parking there and the etiquette of backcountry hunting and angling and hiking. There's an area we think we can expand to where we can have more primitive camping and expand the number of people that area can hold overnight. Putting up more hitching posts for horses, organizing the parking a little better. So there's large areas that are just for parking and then large areas that are just for camping. We come up with a bunch of ideas. We think we've come up with some great ideas that'll make a great impact and being able to hold and host more people who are going into the backcountry and dealing with vehicle traffic up there and parking. So it was a good partnership and we'll continue to work on that throughout the summer. We're also in the middle of doing a bunch of habitat projects. Shingle Mill and Mill Creek are a few of those that we teamed up with the Forest Service and the BLM on, and we're also doing range utilization surveys. So we go out with BLM and Forest Service, their range cons, their wildlife biologists, and the habitat section from our agency and the wildlife section from our agency get together and go evaluate the range, what it looks like, what the use over the winter looks like, and we take measurements and do some research there. And that's a long-term program we have been doing for decades, but it's always good to go out in the spring and see what's happening on the land. Our outreach section has several events coming up. This week, we're up in Huntington Canyon. We're doing Emory Conservation Days with some of the school kids. We have a clinic for women, a shooting clinic in Blanding, planned for June 3rd and 4th. We'll have some press releases and information going out on that. If you want specific information before then, just let me know and I'll send it to you. And then we have a special needs fishing day in Helper on June 22nd that we team up with the Forest Service and conduct every year. Next slide, yeah. Okay, our law enforcement officers are busy. They're checking bears. Our officer on the San Juan and LaSalle areas have reported that they're getting good feedback from the hunters and recreationists in those areas. As you know, the RAC and the Wildlife Board made some changes there as far as pursuit and season regulations. And so that's been, the change has been noted. And they had some positive things to say about that. Our officer, Chuck Lawrence, donated a bison head to his alma mater, Tooele High School. So that was kind of a fun event that we did this last month. Our wildlife section has been busy doing deer classification, doing bird surveys, eagle surveys. And hopefully all of you know, we're been planning for a meeting tomorrow in Monticello at the Hideout Community Center. It'll be from 6 to 9, and it's something our new director, Director Jay Shirley, has wanted to do in a few different areas in the state. And so this initial go around, there's 3 different locations and that focus on southern Utah, and one of them is in Monticello. The idea is to hold the meeting. We'll have BYU researchers there to discuss some of their findings in the units around Monticello. And then we'll have Guy Wallace and Makita Hansen speak briefly on wildlife and habitat. And then we want to listen to our constituents and the public and see what their concerns are, what their thoughts are, what their suggestions are about, mainly focused on mule deer management. But we look forward to that. We hope the word has gotten out. It's kind of come up pretty quickly, but we've let county commissioners and our sportsman groups know, and we've given it to the local media down there. So we hope that we have a great turnout tomorrow. So if you're in the Monticello area, bring a friend, bring the family, and come learn about mule deer and come tell us what you're thinking and what you're seeing. We'd love to hear from you. It's from 6 to 9. There is talk about having that meeting in other locations throughout the state. Price has been mentioned as an area for the northern part of our region. No dates haven't been set, but there's talk about continuing to do this and expanding where we're doing it. So that could hopefully happen in the future. Our aquatic section, they have been gill netting at Schofield, and I was on that event on Friday, and it was really cool to see. Schofield is back. It's been back for some time, and every time we do a gill net survey, it confirms that Schofield is back and is a great fishery. As we pulled the nets in 5 different areas, we found the fewest number of chubs since 2007 when they were first detected. We had the greatest number of trout since 2013, so in 9 years. And we caught in the nets several tiger muskies that were 38 inches and 2 different year classes of wiper, which some were up to 3 pounds. So very positive results from that gill net. We're excited. The trends continue to look really good at Schofield. We have a new native fisheries biologist. For those who knew Dan Keller, he was in that position for a lot of years. He got a promotion. He now is the lead biologist at Lake Powell. So he moved to Kanab and he's managing that fishery down there. Tyler Arnold, who was one of our aquatic invasive species biologists, kind of over monitoring and surveillance in the central and the southeastern region. He moved into that position. That's his passion is native fish, and he'll do a great job there. We'll continue to work on the Olson Reservoir project with our partners. Where the environmental assessment has been written, and it'll go out for some internal review and then hopefully move forward on that project. It's received an extension. And then, did I get everything? Okay, that's all I have. Any questions for me? And if I can't answer questions, we have biologists here in the room and online that can answer questions. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Chris. Next, we have just an informational item with Kyle Maynard on conflict of interest. Are you on, Kyle?
I am. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank y'all for having me out this evening. I'm the Assistant Attorney General assigned to the Division of Wildlife. A lot of you met me around this time last year. We did our biannual or every 2-year training for RAC and board members where we covered some of this material, and it's a tough subject. And so we thought it would be good to try to do a refresher every year because it is a difficult subject. So conflicts of interest, we really look at two main statutes that dictate board and RAC members' operation with conflicts of interest. So the first one would be Statute 67, which is our Public Employee Ethics Act. And the other would be Title 79, which is DNR's statute in the Utah Code. So these statutes go through a very legalese version of conflicts of interest. And so what we try to do is we try to break them down into two categories that try to make it easier to identify, what to do in a given situation. One category is actual conflicts of interest, and the other is perceived. Actual conflicts of interest, pretty much they involve a situation where a RAC or board member would be voting on a matter where they could be involved financially or economically, or organization that they have a decision-making role in could be financially or economically impacted. So some examples of that I'll just run through really quickly. A member is an officer, employee, director, or administrator in an organization that may be financially or economically impacted. It doesn't matter if it's positively or negatively. Same for a member, their spouse, or minor children. If they have a substantial ownership interest in an organization or business that might be financially or economically impacted. A substantial ownership interest is defined. It's 10% or greater. A member or a member's immediate family may be financially or economically impacted in a manner that's different from the general public. Or a situation where a member is just unable to remain objective. The goal in these public meetings is to be as objective as possible and receive comments from the public and weigh the local public's interest in the issues before the board. And last, there's members that have a personal investment in an organization or business that would create a substantial conflict. Those are all scenarios where a RAC or board member would need to declare that they have a conflict and recuse themselves from voting. Under Title 79, the DNR code, members are allowed to have a conflict and participate in discussions, but they do have to recuse themselves. So those are actual conflicts, and perceived conflicts of interest are ones where you have a membership in an organization, but you don't really have a decision-making role. Things that the public would see that could be thought of as a conflict of interest, but you really don't have a financial or economic interest in that organization or business. And in those scenarios, you just want to declare, and this is all in the name of disclosure and openness to the public, is say, hey, I have involvement in X organization or business, but I don't feel that it impacts my ability to remain objective. And as long as you feel that you can be objective, then you go ahead and after your declaration, you say to the affirmative that you feel comfortable voting. So that we try to break that down into those two categories. And I know it is really tough to decipher this where they fall a lot of the times. And so as issues come up and you see the agenda, if you have any questions, my door is always open. you can always give me a call and we can talk through things. So with that, are there any questions?
Anybody have any questions for Kyle? All right, well, if we have no questions, we'll move on.
All right. Well, thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Stick around. We're probably going to need your services soon enough.
Yeah, I'll be here.
Okay, on to our first action item, item number 6, our upland game management plan, fall turkey permits and air rifle recommendations. Everybody listen to that online, read the stuff, and Tally is here to answer questions for you. Any questions from the RAC?
Do you mind if I start out with just some clarifications? Is
Oh,
that okay?
go right ahead, please do.
Great, thank you. First, I just wanted to let everyone know about an oversight on my part for recommending 2 beardless tags in the fall and then 1 hunter's choice. We will actually need to make a rule change for that to happen, and that's in R 657-54-12 for identification of species and sex. The first point under there explains during the spring seasons, the head and beard must remain attached to the carcass of wild turkey while being transported. So for that point, we would need to strike out the during the spring season, since now we have 2 different permits that are offered in the fall. And the second part we would strike out completely that states during the fall season only, the head must remain attached to the carcass of wild turkey while being transported. So having said that, just a little bit more information on our fall hunts. We just wanted to reiterate that this is just a tool to deal with nuisance and depredation issues. And these are largely or entirely private lands areas that we have these hunts on. And we have seen that there's more toms and more males in general being taken on the fall hunt, and where this is designed to decrease populations in these small localized areas where damage is occurring. That's why we're bringing forward the recommendation for the beardless permits as well. Also, just some clarification on the upland game plan. This gives us more direction, helps us with prioritizing different things, and gives us measurable objectives so that we know what success looks like. And there's a way to quantify that, as well as garnering more support for getting those priorities funded. And then finally, with the air guns, this was passed by legislation this last session. And originally, we had heard that the conversation revolved more around opening up air guns for all turkey seasons. But after further discussions, we feel really grateful that the legislation decided to task the Wildlife Board with designating those species in which air rifles could be used for legal harvest. So because rimfires are already allowed for fall turkey and rabbits and hares, that's why we are recommending that. Also, just to reiterate the minimum requirements, we do have that written in the RAC packet that it would have to be a pre-charged pneumatic air rifle with a firing at a velocity of at least 2,000 PSI. And a pellet or slug would be used that has to be at least 25 caliber, 18 grains or more, and produce at least 30 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. So with those minimum requirements, we do feel that this would be a lethal take and we wouldn't see much wounding loss.
I have a couple of questions. With regard to the turkeys, if I understood your presentation right, some of these hunts happen not only on private land, but also on public land. Is that correct? Is that accurate?
In one very small location currently.
And why is the public land included in it? What's the logic behind that? Because to me, that defeats the purpose of removing them from the private land.
Sure. And that's not happening that's only in one area in one region, but that was occurring because those turkeys were coming down from that public land and getting onto private areas that were surrounding it. And we've had discussions with the biologists in those areas. It turns out that it's pretty hard to access. So they're only getting targeted in those easily accessed areas where they'd be coming onto private. And so they still did have a lot of refuge on that public piece. But for most of our fall hunts are just public or private only. And we have talked with that region. They have decided that with the populations becoming more under control in those depredation areas, they are planning on eliminating that boundary for next year.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question is in regards to the air rifles.
Okay.
Why is there, I appreciate the explanation of the minimum requirements for that. I guess my concern is more for the maximum. Why is there not a limitation on that? That's a concern for me because they're hunting big game with air rifles. And when we compare it to a rimfire rifle for the fall hunt, some of these air rifles are like turning loose someone with a high-powered rifle.
So they are.
Is that a concern?
They are hunting big game with the air rifles that fire a bolt or arrow, not with a pellet or slug. So that is a little bit different just off the bat. And then we can look into that more, but we haven't, from the conversations that I've had with Mitch King from Montana with the Air Gun Association there, it didn't sound like there was any issues of people having too powerful of guns. It sounded like most air guns that he sees that are legal in other states or that he sees are very common are 17 or 22 caliber. So he didn't feel like there was a big issue as far as having an overly powerful gun, but we can look into that more.
You'll have a question online. Charles Fisher, go ahead.
Oh, not necessarily a question, just wanted to say, read through the plan and I like the plan. One thing I wanted to touch on here is one of your objectives is to work with the regional staff and other partners to apply for at least 5 WRI projects per region per year. How are you going to implement that, as small game generally isn't a big thing within WRI and they generally don't rank out very high in their threats?
That is true that a lot of times, because of the way that WRI is structured, there's less funding available, but we still do have a substantial amount of funding every year for WRI for upland game birds. And a lot of projects that we have that are big game centric are also very much benefiting different upland game species. So it's just a matter of meeting with those biologists and making sure that they're submitting those different projects into the WRI database every year. We can ensure that that happens through work plan meetings and other internal structure. But we do have quite a few projects that occur in WRI, as you can see in the upland plan. I think if you've read through it, you can see that table. I think it's table number 3.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Straight all of our plan.
Yeah, I was just wondering, as I don't generally see upland talked about much in WRI meetings, so I'm excited to see it thrown back in there, and I was just wondering how you guys were planning on implementing that. So thank you.
Sure.
Other questions from the RAC? We have questions from the audience. Yeah, we'll have a report from Chris Wood on the public surveys now.
We had one person respond to the survey questions in our region. This person somewhat agreed with the recommendation. You've all seen the comment, you received the email that showed the comment, but I'll just briefly say that they love the proposal. However, they had concerns with tom harvest.
We have one comment from the audience, Kevin Norman.
Kevin Norman representing SFW. We would like to support the division's recommendations with the exception of the fall turkey hunt. We feel that the numbers are down so much on the turkeys that we can't support the harvest and of hens. We'd like to see it go to a one fall tag only, either sex, and to help grow our population again. We see this as a wonderful opportunity for new hunters and youth hunters, and there's not really a carrying capacity for turkeys. So we'd like to see the turkey population grow and to provide more opportunities for that spring turkey hunt. We also recognize that, there is a problem with nuisance birds, and that's kind of the reason for this fall hunt. So it's kind of a tricky situation with the public lands being included in this because it kind of compounds the problem of what this hunt was meant for, to keep these nuisance birds at bay. By including public lands in this fall hunt, it pushes those birds more into problem areas. So we'd like to look into other options like feeding programs. We'd be willing to fund and support those. The division has got a few of those going and they seem to be successful. So we'd like to look more in that direction rather than just putting the herd on our hands. Thank you for your time.
I think that's all of our public comments. Comments from the RAC.
Could I ask a question, follow up to that? I've listened to some of the other RACs and I believe they said that these feeding programs are effective in moving birds. Is that accurate?
So a winter feeding program is a different structure than just providing hay for stopover areas. So we just want to make sure that that's clear, that we have in fact secured different hay bales from NWTF from Nephi and taken them to several different regions in the past. And that has been effective in keeping those turkeys stopped over from coming onto depredation and nuisance areas. So that is something that we continue to evaluate.
And one last question. Have you considered a depredation type hunt similar to big game for these really problem areas rather than just opening it up for everybody?
So we do have control permits for landowners which is through the depredation database. And I need to compile those numbers to see how that's reacted with the public permits being allowed. But essentially, it's somewhat the same as a depredation hunt. Rather, it's not a hunter pool hunt, so we're not calling specific people like you would in a specialized depredation hunt for big game. But we do adjust the boundaries every year. We adjust the maximum number of permits on the region every year, and the season dates can be adjusted every year. So with that flexibility, we're able to target different boundaries in different areas.
Yeah, question. Have you considered or do you continue? I know there has been in the past some relocation efforts with turkeys. Can you speak on that?
Definitely. Do you want me to pull up some data on years of translocation efforts?
If you have it readily available, sure.
So, and I can look at the different, parse out this region if you need, but it looks like last year in the fall season, we translocated 722. The year before that was 1,443. Before that was 1,143, and then 2,154. So we have been actively translocating birds. If we don't have good snowpack and concentrations of birds where they're going to come into bait, it's very difficult to trap them. We have utilized other methods though, including drop nets and net guns and things like that when it's possible to translocate them, but we have not curtailed any efforts to translocations. That's still something that we do as much as possible.
Okay, appreciate that. Good to hear and appreciate those efforts. Yes.
I have one question about the air rifles. Have you talked with the legislature at all about the possibility of some kind of a conservation tax in order to be able to use those?
Yeah, I forgot to bring that up. Thank you so much. So at the northern region, the legislator that pushed this forward seconded the motion to attach a conservation stamp to people that would like to hunt with air guns, because that way we could capture some kind of excise tax in lieu of PR. So if this RAC wanted to make the same motion, I feel it would be appropriate.
Thank you.
I was just going to comment on the very same thing. So it sounds like it's been addressed, so I don't know if all the board's aware of it, but there's a fee, a Pittman-Robertson federal tax on all firearms with the exception of air rifles. And so that's the reason for perhaps that. And I think maybe we should do something to the same degree and just let them kind of structure it, the board structure it.
Yeah, I have some big concern about that as well. I think that the proposal that the Northern RAC did is a good option. It's my understanding that the air rifle companies have actually tried to get the Pittman-Robertson tax assessed to them, but for some reason, after 4 years, it still hasn't. So this is a good option, I think. I do think it's very, I know I've talked with several other people about this, and I think we've got surrounding states that are watching this very closely because it can affect all of the western states. And I think we got to make sure we get it right. And so I think that option is a good thing. I do have a concern about the capacity of these air rifles, because even though there may not be some, we've seen it with technology. As we approve something, it's much harder to go back afterwards and take things back once they've been approved. And so I really would like to see the division look into that, some type of a maximum capacity, so we're not turning hunters loose with high-powered rifles, essentially.
Any other comments from the RAC?
I just have one quick comment. Not about turkeys, but I just want to compliment the division for their pursuing increasing opportunities for chukar hunts. And I just see a big need for a lot of kids to get out and start to love hunting. And I think it's the absolute best way is to get them out bird hunting. And this gentleman from the RAC that brought up, the funding, I think anything we can do to increase that and focus on that, it's going to pay off in the long run. So anything I can do to help with that. We need a youth hunt in San Juan County. Write that down for me.
I got it.
Thank you.
Like Sunshine has a comment as well. Go ahead.
I just worry a little bit about how humane they are. And I also worry about, because they're so quiet, it might make it easier for people to poach animals. So those are my two concerns.
As far as, sorry, do you want me to comment on that? Okay. As far as being humane, they should be very lethal at the 25 caliber minimum. And I don't think there's any concerns about that, combined with 2000 PSI and 30 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle and the 18 grains or more for the pellet or slug. It should be fairly, we're not worried about that as far as lethality. But as far as the quietness of air guns, I haven't investigated the different air guns and how quiet versus how loud they might be. But we're, as with any weapon type, we would see we may see poaching or may not. And we just have to have our law enforcement be vigilant, and people make sure that they are turning people in if they're seeing anything that shouldn't be happening.
Eric, you mentioned that we need to probably get this right in Utah because other people are watching us. So I guess that kind of brought up a question to me. Are the air guns legal in other states for hunting? Does anyone know?
Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe they are. I know the air rifle companies have been pushing this pretty hard. Remember here a while back, we had the air bolts, and we had the same issue then with the Pittman-Robertson thing, and it was pushed back to do that, and still to this day, nothing has happened. So I really like this option of the conservation stamp. But I do not believe that any of the surrounding states currently are allowing them. I could be wrong, though.
They do allow it. They do. We do have a list of states. 1 second, and I can look up that information from when I researched this in 2020. So I'm just pulling that up right now. And I know that Texas recently passed something this year, but we do have they are allowed in Arizona with a bow or arrow, it looks like. And sorry, I'm just going to read through this really quickly so that I make
While
sure I
she's
give
reading
you.
it, I'll make the comment. I do appreciate the idea of getting something similar to Pittman Robinson because the intent, it seems like, of Pittman Robinson was to help facilitate that conservation on purchasing of firearms. And if you're going to use an air gun as a firearm, it seems logical to follow in that footsteps.
It is.
And I just worry about
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sunshine.
I guess I just worry about the poaching because the law enforcement won't be able to hear the shot, and neither will other people in the area in order to report poaching.
I understand
would-
that, and that's understandable, definitely. We do see, though, with the current rimfire firearms are also quiet for the fall hunt. So I feel like that our law enforcement is attuned to that situation. Sorry, go ahead.
I would think that, I mean, it's a valid concern, but I would be willing to step out and say that someone who's planning on poaching with an air rifle is probably already doing it.
So just to further my explanation, it looks, I couldn't find the exact verbiage for Arizona, so I'm not sure on that. I know California has air rifles powered by compressed air or gas used with any caliber of pellet, except wild turkey may only be taken with a pellet that is at least a 17 caliber. Maryland also has air guns that shoot bolts or arrows allowed. And other states, let's see, Virginia has a 35 caliber or larger for fall turkey hunting. And I know that Texas recently passed something. I can look that up if you need me to, but the other states do have some form of extra tax that they attribute to the air guns use.
Any other comments? One thing I would remind the RAC is this air gun proposal is in response to legislation. So the board, wildlife board and the division were instructed by the legislature to come up with some sort of a rule to allow air guns to be used. So, you know, and Eric and I had this conversation the other day a little bit, and I agree with Eric and Dana in that we really need to get this right as best we can, but we're left without an option. We have to do it. It's been legislated. It's kind of up to the RAC and the board and the division what it looks like, but it has to be done. And the best option, I believe, is a conservation stamp, the motion that was made in the northern region. And that can be thrown back to the legislature. We can make a motion that we would approve this and ask the wildlife board to approve it. pending the legislature putting an excise tax on it for the purposes of wildlife management. Because that's what Pittman-Robertson is. It's strictly used, it's gathered and collected at the federal level, and it's distributed to the states for wildlife management. And that's all it's used for. And I firmly believe that anything, tools that we use as hunters and fishermen need to be excise tax for the purposes of helping to pay for wildlife.
Can I ask kind of a question / comment to Eric? Have you got any thought on putting a limit and how you would structure that? I imagine we could make a recommendation as such. So about the higher limit of something to that effect.
I don't have anything specific in mind. I think the division, I trust, that they could come up with something that would be acceptable and it's more of the safety concern for me. And I think that I have faith that they could come up with something that would be adequate for that.
Any other comments from the RAC? If we have no more comments, I would entertain motions.
So do you want two motions, one to address the?
Yes. So
Okay.
I would like, I think the best way to break this out is to address the upland game hunting in general, the management plan. And if there was something separate, somebody wanted to talk about turkeys, we could do that, but we definitely want to set out the air rifle question separately in a motion.
Which one first?
I'll take a stab at the air rifle. Make a motion that we, excuse me, that we accept the division's proposal to allow air gun hunting for the fall turkey and the rabbits and hares as stated, with the exception that the legislation passes or that they purchase a conservation stamp, which the money would come back towards wildlife. And also with the exception that the division looks at a maximum power or maximum criteria for the air guns.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Eric and a second by Brad. Just for clarification, I'm going to see if I got this right, Eric. Okay, your motion is to accept the division's proposal for the use of air guns for turkey, rabbits, and hares, with the exception, for fall turkey, rabbits, and hares, fall turkey. And with the caveat that this is contingent upon the legislature passing a conservation stamp for the funding of wildlife and the division setting minimum and maximum power parameters on the air rifles. That cover it? Okay, perfect. So we have the motion and the second. Any more discussion on the motion?
I guess I just had a question. First, thanks for the clarification, because I wanted to make sure the approval of the hunt units were dependent on the conservation stamp. So your clarification helped. But my second thought was I wasn't sure if it was dependent on a maximum value. I was hearing that we wanted the division to look into the maximum value, and if the maximum value is appropriate, put it in there. And if it isn't appropriate at the time, that would be okay as well. I just have a question on where do we sit on that? I like that idea. I just don't know enough of the maximum caliber.
I think I would be okay with the proposal for them to look into that. I really feel strongly that it's a good thing to have, whether or not that was in there, if I would, reject my motion or pull my motion back, if that wasn't an absolute. So
Charles, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to ask about the maximum. I myself don't really see a need for it. I mean, no one has brought it up to me here in public. No one's brought it up to me. No one's brought it up to me online. No one's brought the maximum through the process. That seems to be something we're just bringing here at the RAC board. So, in that thought process, I would rather not see us do that because it hasn't been an agenda item and hasn't been commented on by folks of the public.
Thank you for that comment. Something good to think about. The reason for that is, and again, Eric told me this, his reason for that earlier, is we've seen it before, and Eric alluded to that earlier in his comments with, well, I'll use muzzleloaders specifically. Back in the 1970s, you remember the buckskin clad mountain man guys that had their little rendezvous here and there. And it seemed like there was a club in every town, and they lobbied and they fought to get seasons specific to hunt with their weapon of choice, which was flintlock and percussion cap side lock muzzle loaders that mostly fired a round ball with a patch. As soon as those seasons started coming into being, about 1984, 85, here comes a guy named Tony Knight. And muzzleloaders have never been the same. Because as soon as something, like Eric said, as soon as something becomes legal, and this is the way you hunt, this is a tool, somebody is going to come along. It's human nature. It's what we do, and it's especially what we do as Americans. We're entrepreneurs. We push the boundaries. We look for new frontiers. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just what happens. Somebody's going to come along. Some whiz kid's going to come along and figure out a way to make an air rifle shoot 200 yards accurately and lethally. And that was the conversation. That was where Eric's concern comes from. And I think it's a valid concern to maybe get out in front of it before it happens, as we have past precedent that shows what happens to what was originally implemented as a primitive weapons season is now the single shot long range rifle hunt that just happens to load from the muzzle. So I think that's Eric's concern. Am I correct?
yes, spot on.
Okay, so we do have a motion on the floor and it's been seconded. Is there any more discussion on the motion?
One more quick question.
Yes.
So it's mentioned that there's a legislative action that needs to take place prior to us assessing a fee on the air rifles, or can we recommend it regardless of what
Well-
legislation?
We can recommend that, and I'm going to defer that question to Kyle Maynard. Are you still on, Kyle?
Yep, I'm here. Do you mind repeating the question for me?
Go ahead, Brad, repeat your question.
So I believe the motion states that our suggestion of assessing a conservation stamp or some fee for the air rifles is contingent on the legislative action of related to that. And I don't know that we necessarily have to base it on legislative action. We just want to recommend that we put a conservation stamp or a fee of some sort on air rifles, regardless of what legislation may take place.
So you could do either. If you do a motion and pass a vote on just a recommendation that the division or the legislature seeks some sort of fee or tax on these without the condition, then the recommendation moves forward and it's a matter of putting in the time to get this passed to the legislature, what needs to be passed. And in the current motion, if I understand it right, since it's contingent upon the fee being passed, the rule would not be enacted until that fee went into effect. If I remember correctly, the contingent vote is similar to the Northern RAC. Is that right?
Yes.
And if it helps for clarification, so the division, we'd have to take a deep dive into what that action would look like. There are special tags that the division has, or special tags and licenses that the division has the authority to create. But regardless, that would require at least a fee schedule change through the legislature. So there is some legislative action, be it a fee schedule change or the legislature implementing a fee itself, if that helps clarify anything.
Where's mud, Brad?
But I believe we could go,
Did you have a comment, Chris?
I just have a question on the motion itself, and should I
Okay,
read
just-
what I wrote down?
okay.
And see, that's what I got, because it kind of hurt. The motion is to accept the division's proposal to allow air gun hunting for fall turkeys, rabbits, and hares as stated. The acceptance of this proposal is contingent upon the legislature creating a conservation stamp. And then the exception that the division look at the maximum power criteria for the air guns. Is that right?
That's pretty close. That make sure that it's worded to where the air rifles have to purchase that stamp to be able to be used. Maybe that's the way it states, but that's the intent is.
the only thing I'm wondering is that we propose a conservation tag with a fee of some sort on air rifles.
Well, yeah, well, need your mic on when you speak. And then Brad had a question about the contingency on the legislature acting. Now, in order to enact a tax, which is what a conservation stamp is an excise tax, the legislature has to do that.
Okay,
That,
well, then
the
maybe-
division can't do it, the wildlife board can't do it. That's an act for the legislature to levy taxes. And Charles, you have a comment?
Yeah, I might be reading this wrong, so I was wondering if you guys could help me, but it's R657-54-54 authorized weapons, and it authorizes rimfire weapons for the fall turkey hunt. And I'm wondering if
You cut out, Charles. Would you start over, please?
Muted.
okay, sorry about that. If we're already allowing rimfire rifles during the fall turkey hunt, why are we worried about a maximum power with an air rifle?
Because we want it to be equivalent to a rimfire, not a high-powered rifle. They hunt big game with these air rifles, like really big game. So we're talking 40 caliber, it's not, some of these air rifles are not even close to equivalent to a rimfire rifle, which is all that's allowed for the fall turkey hunt. That's the point.
Okay.
Any more clarification needed? Any more discussion? Okay, we'll go to a vote, and I believe we'll do this roll call because we have some members online. Scoot,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Darren,
Yes.
Stephen,
Yes.
Brad,
yes.
Lynn,
Yeah.
Todd,
Yes.
Sunshine,
Opposed.
Dana,
Yes.
and Charles.
Opposed.
We have 9 in favor, 2 opposed, motion carries. All right, further motions on this agenda item.
Like, so to make a motion that we accept the division's recommendations for, would we say the wild game, upland game management plan and the fall turkey permits?
I'll second that.
Does that,
I
does
have a
that cover
motion.
the rest of the turkey things? Because that's what I want my motion to do.
Cover everything?
Cover the rest of the turkey.
Okay, we have a motion from Dana Truman to accept the remainder of the division's proposals as presented, and a second by Stephen. Any question on the motion or discussion?
I guess I have a comment, if that's appropriate. I do have some concern with accepting all 3 tags as is proposed. With the drought, even the division has acknowledged that turkey numbers are down and they're susceptible to drought conditions, just like big game are. And with our turkey numbers decreasing over the last year or 2, I just kind of struggle with hunting hens. So I understand the problem areas, and that's why I asked maybe about a depredation type of hunt. I think it's a great opportunity for youth. So I think the hunt is a good thing. I would be much more in favor of that 1 tag, an either sex tag, similar to what I believe was proposed earlier.
Can I ask you a question? I probably should have asked this earlier. In the proposal, it stated that they wanted to save the bearded turkeys for the following spring. Who is they? Who wants to save the bearded turkeys? Is it these landowners that are being affected by?
No,
additional turkeys?
it's been this public sentiment. So we've heard from the public, and part of that was during the 2020 RAC tour. That's things that we heard from the RAC and from the public then. And just, just any public that's reached out to us, that's who would like us to save those bearded toms for the spring hunt. And yeah, and these are localized small areas where we are taking the hens. I don't know if you have any regional specific questions. We do have the region biologist here that could answer any of those if you do have something.
I guess to follow up with Eric's question, I think it is a valid concern. It's always hard during drought to allow the hunting of the hens or see higher harvest. But I think what I heard is that the division, because of this hunt and the plan, there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of adjustments that go in annually. Can you verify that or talk to that a little bit?
Definitely. So yeah, every year we can set the season dates. You can change those, change the hunt boundaries, and change the maximum permit numbers per region. So that's how we're able to tailor this. We've already done this in a lot of regions. I know last year Central region went from unlimited to capping their numbers. We've had some fall hunt boundaries are being shrunk or completely omitted from different regions. And I think that down here, it sounds like the populations are still doing decent despite the drought. But we also, something that I forgot to mention was that we are in fact opening the turkey plan within the next month. And then that plan will come through this process next year at this time. So we are in the process of forming a committee, and we can make further rule changes or further changes to the wild turkey plan at that time. So this would essentially be in place for 1 year and then might be changed after that.
Any other questions? Comments, discussion on the motion?
Yes. Are you asking me?
Yeah. I'll just add, okay, yeah, we'll go ahead to the roll call and scoot voted yes.
Yes.
Eric,
No.
Darren,
Yes.
Stephen,
Yes.
Brad,
Yes.
Lynn,
Yes.
Todd,
Yes.
Sunshine,
No.
Dana,
Yes.
Charles.
Yes.
Okay, again, we have 9 in favor and 2 opposed. Motion carries. That takes care of upland game.
I guess I had a question. I've
Go ahead.
enjoyed when I listen to some of the other RACs sometimes to get the feedback on why people oppose. Just, you could take it back to the board meeting. And I was just wondering if we could ask those that opposed, can you share some of your thoughts? If you don't want to, that's fine.
And they do ask that. That's a good
They,
question.
it's a good question, and they occasionally ask that,
Mhm.
so yes. So we'll start with the first motion on the air guns, and I think I know why Sunshine voted no on that, but why did you vote no on the air guns?
I think, let's see. I think that there is issues with poaching and air guns. And if you have an air gun with you, it opens up a reason to less of an argument against poaching, so it's harder to prosecute people. And I also really feel like there are issues with humane hunting. I know people take long shots. I know that a lot of people aren't really accurate with air guns. And I know there can be issues with non-fatalities in air guns. And I do think that we need to reduce the number of hens that are taken. I know lots of people that turkey hunt in the area and they have a hard time. So I think the population is not doing well.
Okay. That covers both of them. Thank you, Sunshine, appreciate it. So Charles, on the issue of the air guns, why did you vote no?
I was for pretty much every part of that except for the required maximum, and not that I don't think there needs to be a required maximum. I just don't know if bringing it up at the rack here is the place to do it. I think it's hard for me to imagine somebody trying to shoot a turkey with a 40 caliber air gun. I don't see that as a thing, and limiting people's access to this not new technology, but this new way of hunting, I don't think is a good way to go into it.
Okay. And Eric, you want to summarize your no vote?
Just mostly for the drought conditions, we just went through our big game and we're reducing deer tags because of the drought conditions, because the numbers are down. I just have a hard time with going the opposite direction on the turkey. The fact that the turkey committee is convening, I don't think we can get it too wrong here, so it'll be corrected next year, but that was my reason.
Okay, thank you. And I will report on that. Good suggestion. Thanks, Dana.
Now I'm not going to ever vote no.
Yeah, because now I'm gonna put you on, I'll just ask you why you vote yes. Okay, we can move on to item number 7, landowner rule amendments. This should be fun. Okay. Starting out here, I guess do you want an overview? Does anybody on the RAC want a kind of an overview of what's going on? Just, you want to run through that, Chad? Kind of just the 5-minute Reader's Digest condensed version of what the new proposal is?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think this is complicated enough that it helps with a refresher. However many times we can go through it makes a little bit more sense, hopefully each time. So yeah, I'd just start out with kind of how we got here. This was something that the board has been asking for us to look at for quite some time, probably 10 plus years or so. Somehow all the stars aligned and I was the lucky guy that got to do it. So when we were asked to do that, we tried to get diverse input from many sources. So one thing we did was we formed a committee. Now on a rule change, we don't always form committees. We don't have to do this. We looked at it as a complex enough issue that we decided to do that. Just to note, as part of that, we did have 2 LOA presidents as part of that committee, and they were chosen strategically. So one was Diamond Mountain, had a seat at the table because they're the largest LOA that we have, and we could see that there could potentially be conflicts there. And then we also had Chris Robinson from the Pavant, who is the largest landowner in the state, I believe, or one of the largest. And I hope Chris, if he's listening, doesn't take that long. I should say he owns the most land, that he's not a large landowner. But so we really got a diverse committee, sportsmen's people as well, but a lot of, like, we try to equal it out, as many sportsmen as we had landowners on that committee. It happened to be that a lot of our sportsmen also owned land. We also conducted a survey. That survey went out to about 4,000 people. 2,000 of those were directly from our depredation database. So people that we've dealt with in one fashion or another with conflicts on their land. So we did that. With that input, the division formed a recommendation, which is what you guys saw in the proposal. And this process is not complete. It's going through the RAC cycle now. This is the 4th RAC it's going to, and it will still go through the board. And at this point, there's potential for more input on this plan. One thing that we have seen is there's been a lot of discussion leading up in the previous RACs of who was notified when of this plan. I think it's fair to say that everybody, well, the landowners specifically, I don't know if all the sportsmen have been notified super well, but the landowners have been notified of this, and they've known about it for quite some time. I would think that it would be more beneficial for us tonight to, rather than discuss when people knew and if it was enough time, but that we discuss the merits of the proposal tonight. If there's stuff that we don't like, then let's state that. If we have proposed changes, ways to change it, let's propose that as well. I think after the first couple racks, they sent out a red line of the old rule, or I should say the current rule and the proposed rule. There was a lot of red in that. But I just want to clarify that red was more structuring of the rule. It wasn't as much changes. So the changes really weren't a lot. But if you read the current rule, it is very hard to follow. It jumps from place to place. So a lot of that red line is for that. But I won't go clear through the history, but we have landowner programs, and these programs we do because we recognize that landowners bring a benefit to wildlife. At the same time, it's a public resource. So sometimes there's conflict there, and we try to find the compromise in that conflict. So as we went through this, we proposed a few changes, some in the general season. So when currently in the general season, when we formed the tags for landowners there were 97,000 statewide draw tags, and we were given about 3,000 tags for landowners on top of that, 600 for each region in the 5 regions. So with that as a starting base, we propose that keeping that same allocation of 3%, but instead of having it by region, since then, we went from region hunts to unit by unit. So the proposal is to change these tags to unit by unit with allocating them at 3%. And that would be in addition to the draw tags. So it's not taking away from it. But just to be clear that those would fluctuate in the public draw. So with 97,000, we've dropped to mid 70,000, 75, somewhere around there. So there would be less permits this year, but if tags increased, that would increase with it. Or if they decrease more, it would decrease further. And that one's probably a little bit more straightforward than the limited entry. The limited entry is really what the board was asking us to fix. And there was two components really that were needing to be fixed. And one was the distribution of vouchers to the landowner associations. So at times we were seeing just that it would be a little skewed. Under the current rule, you can get a voucher based off of acreage, your percent of acreage, or there was a usage. We were seeing that at times you'd have multiple landowners associations asking for above and beyond what the acreage was. And at times some were granted yes, and others were not. And they stayed with the acreage. So our proposal to fix that is to just go on a straight acreage percentage. So the whatever percentage of acreage they have in the unit with however many permits that we have, and then it would fluctuate. The other one was public access. So we didn't really have a good way to track this, the public access. So we're proposing a way to track it as when you put in for the draw, you're assigned a draw number. So if an LOA were to get 10 vouchers, then the people who had draw numbers 1 through 10 would be granted that access. We would mail them out, get in contact with them, say that you have access to these private lands. We'd also contact the landowner presidents and say, these are the people that have access to the private lands. Now, this isn't a guarantee that they're going to use that access. They still have a choice. I think there's probably a lot of hunters that on a limited entry unit that are probably scouting public land. They probably already have a place picked out. So some of them may not even use that. But the rationale behind that is when we give these vouchers to the landowner associations, those vouchers are good for the whole entire unit, for both the private and the public land. So the rationale is if we're going to give one, say 10 vouchers that they can hunt public land, to ask for that 10 public hunters to be able to have access to that private land seems like a rational thing to do there. And I do want to point out too is, we recognize that private lands are important, that they provide a lot for wildlife and for the state. At the same time, vouchers and these tags, so on the general season, I mentioned that those are additive. These are not additive. So if there's 100 vouchers or 100 permits on the limited entry unit and they qualify for 10, only 90 of those are going to go to the draw. Those 10 are taken out of that. So we recognize the importance of the private lands and what they do for us. At the same time, I don't know if I want to say hold sacred those permits, realizing that those are being given up as well. Just lastly, I touched on this in my presentation, but we have a lot of landowner programs. We have a CWMU program, we have walk-in access, a depredation program. We have a lot. And not every program works for everybody, but we do feel like that there is a program for everyone. With that, I guess I'll take questions.
Oh, yeah. Well, now I'm on, right? Okay, I goofed. I do have a question, and this is kind of a question for the division and for Kyle Maynard as well, is with liability exemptions for landowners with public hunters going onto their land. Is there anything in state law, or how does that work? Do they have exemption from that just by default? Like, it's understood on public land, somebody goes out there hunting is understood as a somewhat dangerous activity. You're on your own and you're liable for your own actions. Does that also hold true on the private land? If these hunters are allowed to go onto there, are the private landowners protected legally from liability on that?
Kyle's all on, ready to go. I'm letting him take it.
So great question. So in state code, there is the Landowner Liability Act. It's a 5714. And I'm looking at 202 right now. So an owner of land can either indirectly or directly invite someone onto their property for no charge or something less than $1. And that is a requirement. And when they invite that individual on their land for recreational purposes, they do not make any representation or assurance that the land is safe. They don't confer any legal status on the invitee or the person coming on their land for a duty of care. They don't assume any responsibility or incur liability for injury. And they don't owe a duty to curtail or stop how they use the land for that recreational purpose. So really what that's saying is private landowners in the LOA, when it comes to these draw permits, this rule change that are coming on their land, as long as they're not charged, there's no liability for that recreation. And I guess I shouldn't say no liability. There are exceptions where there's some malice or intentionality there. But generally speaking, if you invite someone onto your property and you don't charge them a fee, you should be covered by the Landowner Liability Act.
Thank you.
Kyle, as a follow-up to that, so if I understand you right, essentially, the public hunters that get these tags through the draw, there's no liability, but people who purchase those vouchers, the landowners actually have a liability to them because they're being charged. Is that accurate?
I think so. I think that's a potential. And that's a condition that probably already exists. That's not something that's changed in this rule proposal, I guess is what I should say.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
I got a couple of questions for you, Chad. With the access, the LOAs with the new rule have to provide those public hunters that draw in the tags access to their land, but that is only during the hunting season. So there's no access that's granted for scouting purposes or anything like that, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And just to expound on that a little bit further, we would be open for them to create reasonable rules for them to abide by as well. For example, if they didn't want to allow camping on it during the hunting season, I think would be amenable to that, or ATV access. One thing we would ask is that access be the same for both the guy they sell the voucher to and the public guy. So just treating both of those equal would be important to us. And I'll say one other thing, that this is we model it kind of after the CWMU program. We have a list of rules that they check, like how many guests, ATV access, horsebacks, et cetera. The CWMU program's been around for almost 30 years. And we go through a lot of public draw hunters on that. We're saying this year we have 1,500 public draw hunters on CWMUs, and we just don't have issues. Like the CWMUs don't come back to us saying they have any issues with these public hunters. And I think what it is as a public hunter, if you get that notice that you drew, well, you knew you drew, but you also know that the landowner knows you drew. And usually if there's a knowledge between those two, it seems like they stay out of trouble a little bit more, whereas where probably landowners, I would assume, deal with more issues is the people that don't have permission. Those are probably the ones that are really causing most of the troubles.
Couple more questions. As I understand it, the Diamond Mountain LOA has asked for and received the variance basically every year for any public access. Is that accurate?
Yes, for as long as I know, at least.
Do you have a map that shows, I'd like to see one for all of the LOAs, but particularly the Diamond Mountain. That's the biggest one. Do you have a map that you could pull up that we could see?
Yeah, and I don't have one for everyone, but I was asked from someone, maybe it was even you. I don't know.
I know that's kind of last minute notice, but
Yeah, let me just join the meeting real quick. So if there's somebody else has a question to ask in the meantime, while I'm trying to join the meeting, then I'll share it.
Maybe this would be a good time for a couple I have, or at least one. So you were saying that the tag numbers that are given for landowner tags are taken away from the public draw. Is that taken away from the numbers that we approve here in the RACs, or is that done previously to us seeing those numbers? For example, if we approve 2,250 tags on the Abajos, is that 3% taken away previous to that, or after we make that approval?
So yeah, we're probably confusing those two a little bit. As far as the 3% is on general units, so those are the ones that are additive. But on the LOA though, if we use just a round number 100, yeah, if that LOA got 10 of those, then the proposal that we'd bring here would be 90. So yeah, you wouldn't ever see it. And I just want to make sure I'm right on that. Correct, Kobe? That's right. Yep, he says yes. Sorry. Yeah. So here is the map of Diamond Mountain, and I don't know if there's a way for me to make that fit, but you can see it's a really big chunk that's contiguous here. And then you got one up to the right that has some connectivity. And then down on this southwest end.
so the gray area, correct, is the LOA properties.
Yes.
Yeah. And the thing that I see there is a lot of these very small parcels, subdivisions, if you will, what they appear to be. And I'm not familiar with that area real well. So, but I see these and have to wonder how much of that is critical, or used habitat, because if there's a cabin on each one of those parcels, I have a hard time knowing. So what goes into determining whether that property qualifies in the LOA?
if it's in our mapped habitat for that species, that's what we're currently using. So, and Diamond Mountain's here, so they could correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that there's some that are as small as 10 acres. I don't know that there's any that are smaller than 10 acres, but yeah. So yeah, as long as this was to try to make it so all landowners could participate in it, as long as they're in that habitat.
We have a question from Charles. Go ahead.
Well, I just have a little bit on Diamond Mountain. I used to work up there. I'm pretty familiar with the area. Love to fish on Mount Warner and Calder Reservoir there. I think I was an inch off of the catch and release state record at Calder when it used to have water. But the wildlife does use those private properties from being up there a lot. They're definitely on private and public. A lot of those properties don't just have a cabin. They'll be just wide open properties up there.
As far as general season landowner tags go, do we have any idea what the success rate difference is between landowner tags and just your average general season tag?
I don't think we've broken that out. And just to be clear on that too, under the general season landowner tags, those are unit wide permits too. So they may or may not hunt their private property in there.
Other questions from the RAC?
I'm a little slow, so excuse me. I'm thinking about the general tags. So if you have 100 acres, right? For the general tags, you can get a permit. Is that right?
It's 100 acres of cropland or
Okay.
640 acres.
So and that's determined year by year?
Yeah.
Okay, so if I had 100 acres and I had it in alfalfa one year and then I had it plowed under the next year, I wouldn't necessarily qualify. Is that right?
Correct. And to be clear too, that it's not just owning the cropland, it needs to have usage, right? So if you have some crop that isn't being used and there's not any deer around, then you wouldn't qualify.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Chad, but that's not in the LOA. That's landowner appreciation tags, correct?
So in the past, we had general season landowner buck permits, and then we had landowner appreciation. For this, there really wasn't a lot of landowner appreciation tags being used, so we combined the two. So yeah, so they're both coming out of that same pool now.
And in each, so on the LOAs, they're granting access to public hunters, the lowest draw numbers, and also the people that have the landowner tags. I guess I would assume that they're also allowed to give permission to other people that draw the tag?
Yeah.
They choose to? Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, just curious. So on the landowner permits, the general tags, how many of those, how many people put in versus odds on that? Do you have that?
I don't have the exact odds in front of me. What I'll say is the only place where we bumped up against this was the southern region when it was 600, currently as it is 600. I don't think even with this reduction of permits and going 3% per unit, I don't foresee currently that we would hit that cap except in some of those southern region units. So right now we have 3,000 statewide. I think we issued under 1,100, just under between 1,000 and 1,100 permits statewide. So.
And yeah, this is my fault, I'm sure, for not understanding the LOA. Is there a cap? How, I'm trying to understand, if there's 100 tags, I guess the cap is based on land or,
Yeah, percentage of private land. So the unit, the LOA that gets the most right now is Diamond Mountain, and I think it was 53 deer tags. They have 35% of the habitat. So 53 deer tags and 31-ish elk tags. So yeah, I mean, others only have like 1%, or I think we even had one that was less than 1%. So they would just get whatever that number is. And that would fluctuate too. So if permits went up, they'd have the potential to get more. And that was something we saw in the past too, is as we raised permits, the LOAs would get a raise too. But then when we cut, it seems like some of them didn't cut with those cuts. And so that's one of the things we want to correct in here, is that it just make sure that it fluctuates. And to be clear too, so it's a 1-year lag period, and that's intended to make it so they can market those permits. So if this was in effect now, then the numbers that were just passed, those would determine what the LOA got next fall, not this fall, if that makes sense.
So just clarification, because you referenced the 50 and 30 tags that Diamond Mountain gets. That's LOA vouchers, right? That's not general season permits. Is that what you were asking about? The vouchers? Okay.
Yeah, and those are the vouchers. Yeah.
So I have just this question of clarification with the new proposal. There's actually 2 options for the LOAs to grab onto. Then they get to pick whether or not if they choose to not allow the public hunters, then they have another option to where they can only hunt the LOA. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I should have touched on that option too. And that really is like, even through the committee, there was some concern shown about allowing a lot of public access for some of them that have, more hunters. That was an option that we threw out there to help alleviate the amount of public people that they need. So if they got 10 tags, it'd be allowing 2 instead of all 10. We just wanted to give that as an option for those that were concerned about a lot of public access. But it would be restricted to the private land for their private vouchers.
And how would the division differentiate between the 2? Would that be, instead of a voucher, they would just be issued a permit in their name, or how would that work?
No, the LOA would still get a voucher that they could designate. It'd just be designated as for the private lands enrolled in the LOA on those vouchers, and given a map showing where those are.
and maybe there again, just clarifying. So the variance, is that a fair question to ask? That maybe just any landowner and/or with Diamond Mountain specifically?
So the variance was something that is in the current rule, but it's not in the proposed rule. That's something that we're taking out. As we went through this process, we found that was something that was very important to a lot of people, was that if we're giving up vouchers that come out of the draw, that there's some public access in return. So that the variance was taken out, and I guess you could almost say replaced by option 2, the 80-20 split.
Any other questions from the RAC? Do we have any questions from the audience? Go ahead, come up to the mic and state your name.
My name is Randy Searle. I got a question there. It was said that the private landowners on Diamond Mountain have 35% of the habitat. I think he meant 35% of the acreage. We've got 75 or 80% of the habitat on private property. That would be my question.
Yeah, I'll clarify that. So it's 35% of the unit habitat for the species. But I think what he's getting at is if you get the percentage of private landowners enrolled, I think he even went low. From what I understand, it was like almost 100%, like 99% of the private landowners are enrolled in the LOA. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, that's not, but
Oh.
there's 100% of the landowners that are signed in. But what I'm saying, the habitat, 35% of the Diamond Mountain landowners have. We have more, maybe I'm not understanding habitat. Habitat's what the wildlife want to eat on, right? 80% of that's on private property. The DWR has like 65% of acreage, but they don't have the AUMs. All the AUMs are on private property. So it's not really, we need to make sure we clarify where the feed's at.
So yeah, I think to respond to that, I think what he's talking about is usage. So he's saying 80% usage on the LOA private lands. Is that correct? Yeah, and I guess in my mind, if that's the case, I think we have a really good program for Diamond Mountain. You see the contiguous acres there. Our CWMU program, you can do a 90-10 split on it, so they'd only have to take 10% of the public hunters. So yeah, I mean, if they have that high of usage, I think that might be a really good fit for them if those animals are on the private land.
So I have a question. Do we track through our harvest surveys and stuff, where these animals are harvested? Because, well, of course, maybe that's irrelevant because they don't allow any public access. But it's where are the animals taken, including the ones that have the LOA vouchers, are they taken all on private land or are they taken more on public land?
Yeah, we don't have that specific data. I have, you talk to people word of mouth and you hear of a lot that are taken on public land. And that's, I'm not going to just say Diamond on that, but that's on a lot of the LOAs. They can hunt the whole entire unit. So I think we see a decent amount taken on public land, but I don't have specific data to back that up. Hopefully when we get e-tagging, which Covey was going to give us 2 years ago, we'll be able to answer it better.
Charles?
I actually asked Stacy this and didn't give her much time to respond to me, but how much money is the public spending on habitat improvement projects on private land?
So I was able to do a little bit on that, and I didn't get money figures, but I did ask the habitat manager in the Northeast region, Pat, told me that the WRI projects have all been done on public land. So yeah, I don't know that any public money's been spent on private, at least according to Pat.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead.
I'm Whitney Hewlett-Krogh. I represent Diamond Mountain. At this point, I think Chad and a lot of us have heard from a lot of the LOAs. Do you know how many LOAs are in favor of this rule proposal?
No, I've heard, I guess, the ones that have shown up at RACs, which is probably 6 or so that have said they're opposed. The other ones have been pretty silent.
Okay. So have any of the LOAs actually come forward and said that they are in favor of the proposed rule change? Do you know of?
No, like I said, I haven't heard from anybody except for the ones that have shown up at the RACs. So yeah, they've been quiet.
So there's talk of the variance that was in the old rule. Are you aware that Diamond Mountain has allowed public hunters on their land even though they get the variance?
Yeah, we, like I mentioned earlier, we haven't done very good at tracking that, but yeah, we've heard from them that they have allowed people, and I won't even say just Diamond, but other ones too, that they've allowed access.
Is there a way that the DWR could track that? Like how many public hunters and all of that, get that data?
Yeah, it's a little bit difficult. I think we could. One of the other concerns that we ran into for this access too was who was being able to access. We were getting word back from a lot of people that it was friends or family members or community members that would get the access. So it wasn't really a random distributed access for all to participate in. So.
Okay. And that was kind of seen as one of the problems, is that the private landowners could choose who they allowed on their land?
Yeah, just that it wasn't very random. So if you're a guy without any connections, your chances of getting on an LOA were pretty small, where if you had connections, then you could.
We talked about before in the rules that, or in the proposed rules, there's this idea that even though the private landowners can't choose who comes onto their land, like the DWR kind of does that by draw, that the landowners could come up with rules and guidelines that they could then give to the public hunters. And I guess I'm still not really clear on how the DWR is going to, well, if the DWR is going to help private landowners enforce their rules and guidelines, or if that's just left up to the landowners and maybe the legal system or the cops, or what's going to happen with that?
Yeah, I'd say we're committed to help out as much as we can. Obviously, our staff doesn't allow us to be everywhere at once, but so a lot of the initial reporting would probably come from LOAs and landowners, but it would be something that we would support. We don't want to see rule breaking of any kind on private land, on public land, or anywhere. If there's rules in place, we'd ask people to follow those rules, and if they're not, then I think it'd be appropriate to take measures, whatever appropriate measures there are to take on them.
This may show my ignorance on this. What kind of enforcement authority does the DWR have to, like, say somebody goes up and cuts a fence? Does the DWR have authority to impose a fine, or does that have to go through the legal system?
Well, yeah, if it's a legal thing, so to me, that'd be destruction of private property. So yeah, it would have to go through the judicial system, but we have a law enforcement section that, that's what they do, is look for illegal activity, and I would say that they would try to prosecute those.
Mhm.
So
In these rules and guidelines, would the private landowners have any authority to, I don't know, like bar a hunter? Like, so say there's a hunter who's known to cut fences and he draws a tag that, allows him on private land. Do the private landowners have any authority or ability to say, like, no, not that guy?
yeah, I think we'd be open to that. Like if there's past history, and I wouldn't say that it would be completely a landowner's choice, but I would say call us and let's work through it. And if it's like let us help work together on that and figure out how to handle that situation. But yeah, if there's bad actors that have been known in the past, I don't think we'd be supportive of allowing bad actors back onto a private land where they've done stuff. So yeah.
Okay. I have a question too about the liability issue. So I think it's fair to say, at least in some LOAs, this is going to, or at least for some private landowners, this is going to open their property to more more public hunters than they've seen before. Is that fair?
There's potential. I guess that's really hard to say, because like I've said, I think hunters do a really good job of spreading themselves out, especially on a limited entry where there's not as many hunters. I think, if you see people somewhere sometimes you don't want that competition. So that, I think that's a really hard question. I think it's something that we could monitor as we went forward if this passed and see if there's disproportionate use on landowners and then potentially adjust from there.
I think one of the concerns about the liability issue that was brought up before is that there's the statute that says that these public hunters can't win a lawsuit, but it doesn't necessarily stop them from bringing one. And especially if they say, they willingly neglected or they willingly did not, warn us of the rattlesnakes or something. So in that situation, would that be just the private landowners that would have the duty or the obligation of defending against these lawsuits, or does the DWR intend to get involved?
I'm going to pass on that one. Kyle, that one's yours.
Sorry, Kyle. I'm just thinking with the, with an allegation that they willingly did not inform somebody of some kind of a hazard, that would be enough to get past a motion to dismiss. So then, at that point, you're in litigation and it's up to the landowner to prove that they did not willingly fail to inform somebody of a hazard.
It's a really good question. And I think it's one that I would be happy to dig into and discuss more with you at length. Looking at the statute here quickly, to me, it looks like it's a willful or malicious failure. It's not just oh yeah, I knew rattlesnakes were around and I, failed to mention it. It seems to me to be a malicious failure to guard against or warn against dangerous conditions. But to your point, I don't know how DWR would be included in a litigation for liability with landowners, except for potentially how the program structure, just the fact that there's a program that we created and provide these vouchers through.
Okay, so the DWR wouldn't necessarily be involved or help in defending those kinds of lawsuits when they come up.
I don't know if I would have a great answer for that at the moment, to be honest.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Maybe I'll just jump in a little bit. I would refer this back to our CWMU. I feel like the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And I think we have a really good sample size of that in the CWMU program. So it's 28 years worth of, like this year, I said 1,500. That's, I think you could say between 1,000 and 1,500 hunters for 28 years. And we haven't ran into this. So I think we're pretty comfortable with where we are on this.
Is the CWMU one-to-one permits as well?
No, it's they can choose a few different splits, but on bucks and bulls, a lot of times they'll choose 90-10. And if they choose that, then 100% of the antlerless go to the public. So yeah, it's a little
different.
complicated too.
Okay, all right, that's all I've got. Thanks.
Any other questions from the audience? We'll have Chris go through our online comments.
Yeah, we received two responses to our survey for this agenda item. Both respondents strongly disagreed, and for two different reasons. One respondent disagreed because they said they're against taking 600 tags to landowners who are going to sell them to profit. And they thought it made it impossible for the public land hunter resident to get a tag. The other response was from this letter that you all received as well. I think the conclusion here, they asked for the RAC and the board to reject the division's proposal and to And this suggests that any revisions include a broader advisory committee that receives inputs from all LOAs. So that kind of sums it up.
Thank you. And the comment cards from the audience. We'll start here. And again, reminder, you will have a maximum 3 minutes at the microphone. We'll start with Robert Ott.
So if I understand you correctly, I have 3 minutes, even though I represent an association?
You have 3 minutes. Everybody has 3 minutes. If there's something that needs clarification, we can allow some flexibility, but we gotta move the meeting along as well.
Okay. I have some prepared comments, and I'll give a copy to each of you in the RAC, and then I will summarize.
Don't start his time until he gets back to the mic.
My name is Robert Ott, and I am the current president of the Ponce-Gaunt Landowner Wildlife Association. We are an association in a limited premium entry unit for deer in the southern part of the state that comprises pretty much 89 and 12 and the Paria River to the Arizona boundary. We've been in action since the early 90s. We thought we had a pretty good working relationship with the DWR and the public. We have contributed considerably to wildlife. We auction our permits off through the Sportsman for Fish and Wildlife. We give them 10% of the proceeds to be used for wildlife activities. We have members who have done water projects, wildlife projects on their private lands. We have hauled water when the DWR biologist has said that the deer need water on the winter ranges or whatever in their catchments. We have consistently year over year provided extra funds for predator control on the unit. We have also continuously tried to work with the DWR biologist to assure that we had a sustainable, healthy deer herd, and we're always going to be willing to work with the DWR with respect to that. We do have some concerns about the proposal, and one thing that's concerning to us, and I know Chad didn't want to take this up, but we didn't know about these rule changes until just 2 or 3 weeks ago. And yet we're an association that's been working since the early 90s. I think that's an oversight on the division's responsibilities. They should be involving us in these things that impact us. The main issues with the proposal are the voucher allocation method. We don't believe that you can take a map and simply say that here's the habitat, it's all equal all throughout. I will tell you right now that during the drought in southern Utah, the private lands, which are the prime habitat, are being hit way harder than the lands that have no forage and no water. It's just that simple. So if you want to look at deer densities and use densities and those kinds of things with habitat, that's going to skew the use to the private lands that have all those things. And so we think it's an unfair rule to just simply take acres. Am I finished?
Go ahead and finish.
Okay, so the other issues that we have is the determination of hunter access. I will tell you that we have never asked for a variance. We have tried to accommodate all the public hunters that wanted to hunt on our lands on a first come, first served basis. And literally that's what it is. You can't have 20 hunters on one small parcel hunting for one large deer or whatever else. It doesn't work. It ruins the hunt aspect for everybody involved. So we've used a first come, first served basis. And I will tell you that we have accommodated quite a few public hunters. And they haven't been charged a fee either for any of that hunting. They have free access. The access rules. The access rules should be really simple. You're a guest on a private landowner's property. What does the private landowner say he wants you to do and how he wants you to behave? That's the rule. We have irrigated acres. We have some that have residences on part that needs to be excluded from hunters being in there, and we've accounted for that in the acreage for that landowner. So we don't have to write a whole set of published rules for these people who are going to hunt on a property. Sit down and talk to the landowner, work out the hours when he wants you there, even if he wants you to go scout or allow you to go scout on his property. We allow people to scout on our property. It doesn't just have to be during the hunting season. I mean, that's part of the hunting experience. And so the other issue we have is the denial of registration due to members' actions. Our members have enrolled on the basis that they have qualifying acreage that's in FAA status. It has deer habitat and it has deer damage. Now, they're private individuals. If they foul up and want to go do something stupid and violate the law, why would you penalize the LOA and not allow it to be registered because some member in the organization did something stupid and violated the law? We feel that that should be left up to the law and to the LOA, and we can exclude those members from membership in our association if they can't comply with basic rules and honor and integrity and stuff and promoting the wildlife on the unit. So we feel that there's still some things we need to work out in these rules, and we would encourage you to send this back to committee, allow a bunch of us to provide some input on some of these, and see if we can't work it out reasonably with DWR. Thank you.
Thank you. Randy Searle.
Yes, I'm a landowner on Diamond Mountain, and I've owned property there for 42 years, and I've been raised on that mountain. And so, there's so much on this draft that I don't even want to go into all the things that I disagree with on that. But on the liability part, he says that in the last 28 years, they've had no problem. Well, if you're a landowner up there and you happen to have some possessions, you happen to have a little, I hate to use the word money, but that if you have something, it only takes one of those. They can put you out of business. If they want to follow suit, and they'll come everywhere the money's at. And so I think that's a real problem. I think the big problem is with us, I can speak pretty much, I believe, for the Diamond Mountain Landowner Association, is, like with myself, last year I let 4 public hunters on my property. And in the past, we've had a voucher system that we'd get the landowners to sign it and the hunter to sign it, and we'd turn it into WDR, the Division of Wildlife Resources, until they said they didn't need them anymore. If we'd have kept doing that, we wouldn't be here today, because we do let people in on our property. Where we have our problem is it's called private land. That's what it is, private. Like you guys have private homes, private property, so do we. We spend our lifetime accumulating it. We put a lot of work into it. And the bottom line with us is that not only the DWR or the Wildlife Board or the state of Utah or the county or anybody else is going to take away our rights on our private property. That's not going to happen. We let people in. We have always let them in. But we decide who we're going to let in. They said, well, we talked about here, if we had a bad hunter, they'd kind of decide with us. No, they're not going to tell it. We're just not going to go for that. And so what it's going to do, it will end the Diamond Mountain landowners, the limited entry, because we met together with, I'm going to say approximately 130 of our landowners, and every one of them was the same as I have been and everybody else has been. This is our land. We're still in America. We own the property. We have a right to it. A lot of us spent a lot of years and a lot of hard work and a lot of money in. We have, like on my property, I've got 14 wells. I've got 26 ponds that I've made, solid, a bunch of them chop brush, spike, build fence. I've got 4 10,000-gallon water tanks that I had run off of solar pumps and use to water troughs. I can't remember how many water troughs we got, probably 15, 20, 15 water troughs. So the wildlife and everything, yes, they like our property because they got feed, they got water. And then here comes the board and the DWR telling us what we're going to do with our property. I'm sorry, we just that's a violation as far as we're concerned of the Constitution, and we can't do that. And we would really suggest that to the RAC here that the draft be set aside, to go back again. It's like the man from the Ponsagon. We got like 2 months notice. And the reason that I think the guys from the Ponsagon and most of the others RAC even know anything about, or people, the Landowner Association knows anything about it, is because we made sure they got a copy of it. But that's not how we do business. As a businessman, you wouldn't stay in business that way. And so what I'm just saying is what's right's right, and it'll always be right. Nobody will ever change that. And so I think we go back, and if this was set aside and let everybody get involved in it, we could come with things to work this out. But as far as these people, folks telling us that we're going to let the public in on our property and they're going to tell us what we're going to do, it will never happen. And so we'd hate to see the limited entry end. It's been good for the public. It's been good for the DWR. It's been good for the Diamond Mountain Landowner Association. But it will end because as far as if we're going to go ahead and let them in, we will never let that happen. And so we think that we can probably resolve this if we could get together, but we have no input. Our president was on the board. They talked about it earlier. He was on the board, but he never had much chance to have anything said or accepted because he was just one in a group that was against it. So we appreciate you guys and your hard work, and that's how we feel about it. Thank you.
Whitney Krog.
Yeah, me again. So I also run the Mountain Landowners Association. As Randy was saying, this collaboration between the DWR and the landowners has been working pretty well. And I know the DWR, like there's some problems with it, things that could be worked out, but they're willing to do that. But this like total overhaul of the system, it's causing a lot of heartburn, and I think for some good reasons. So one of the things that was taken out of the rule is before it said that the purpose of this program is to compensate the landowners for all the forage that these herds are eating. So these are like trophy herds. They're beautiful. They bring a lot of people in even just to look at them, but they eat a lot. So I think just on the elk side, there are 3 elk AUMs equals 1 cow. So, I mean, these are big herds, and for every 3 elk that are on that property, that's 1 fewer cow that these landowners can raise on that land. And under the depredation statute, you can't get money for that forage. The only options there, as far as I understand, is to like chase them off or do depredation hunts where you just thin out the herd. So this has been a way that the landowners are getting compensated for feeding all of the animals. And so Diamond Mountain owns 35% of the total unit, and that is the prime eating ground. So that's where all the animals go to eat, and then they go and they sleep on the public ground that's lower. So the hunting is still good on the public ground, but it's the landowners that are carrying a lot of the weight in raising these deer and elk. So I think that there's a misconception that the landowners are getting rich off of this program, but most of this money is going back into the land because they have to improve the range to make it so that they can raise their livestock and the elk on it. So as Randy was saying, there's water improvement projects, they're clearing out sagebrush, they're doing predator control, and then they're fixing fences because, elk are really, really hard on fences as well. And then Diamond Mountain is also doing range improvement on public land. So Diamond Mountain has spent over $150,000 on range improvement on on public ground, trying to get the herds to spread out a little bit more. So they're doing water projects down there and trying to spread it out. This rule change, it reduces the number of land permits and it puts a whole new set of restrictions. And I know we've heard a lot about the access problems. Diamond Mountain has had in the past real problems with public hunters on their land. Before the LOA went into effect, in the single year before the LOA went into effect, they had 26 cows shot by public hunters, a horse shot, and 7 cabin burglaries. So this variance it has been really important to them because I think they're a little gun shy about the public hunter situation that they saw before. But despite that, and despite getting the variance, they have been letting public hunters on. But the difference is when these public hunters have to come and ask for permission, that just engenders some more respect for the private land and the private landowners. And so they've had a much better experience when these people have to come and talk to them face to face. And it's not just friends and family. They have strangers reaching out to them. Their information is out there. There are guides that know about it. So they're letting people on their land, but they just want to have control over that. And we've submitted a letter that outlines some of the problems and some of the legal issues that we see with this rule. But even aside from all of that, the main problem with this is policy. The landowners feel like they've given a lot to this program and to the wildlife, and they want to be able to keep that going forward. And again, if the rule needs to be fixed, if there are things that need to be changed, let's do that. But the proposed rule just isn't the right solution. Thank you.
Jacob Frankum.
So I'm Jacob Frankum from Utah Farm Bureau Federation. And we would definitely like to express our appreciation for the DWR in their efforts and also the RAC boards around the state and here locally. But we would like to say that we've had one of our own colleagues on this committee that helped put this new plan together. And we recognize the rights of the private property rights for all these individuals. And also when they decide to sign on with a public program, then also abide by those rules as well. But we would support this plan, but also we would also be open to or recommend that this could go back to the committee after the RAC process has taken place to see if any of these further suggestions from around the state could be applied or adjusted. Thank you.
Tricia Dean.
I'm going to read because I want to be as efficient as possible. So I was on this committee representing sportsmen, and I want to first acknowledge that private landowners are a vital component to wildlife in the state. We want to acknowledge that private landowners are, tolerant of wildlife on their lands, and they should be compensated. That being said, we also want to acknowledge that wildlife is a public resource, and wildlife exists on private lands are held in public trust. This landowner association committee was prompted to make sure that the allocation of tags was fair and equitable across the state and allows public access. So in general, there's been some inequities, and we want to try to remedy that. And the committee was comprised of sportsmen and women, but also a lot of landowners, Diamond Mountain included, and was a diligent effort to make sure that that allocation of tags was equitable amongst landowners and reflective of public allocation and allowed regulated access of public hunters on private land. We spent, if you take into account driving, literally hundreds and hundreds of hours. Many of us are traveling. In my case, I traveled 6 hours. I believe it was 9 times. And landowner associations were there, and we went through a really diligent process, and it wasn't just the meetings, but also this rule being sent out, comments made, sent back, in and out, in and out. So I hope you guys understand this idea of committee and just allow it to go back to committee is a monstrous process. Right now, Kent and I are on the elk management committee, and it's a huge, huge commitment by both landowners, but sportsmen and women. And I think we were very, very diligent and vigilant about what we're proposing tonight. That's it. I'm not going to stay. My turkeys are on my neighbor's porch, and I have to go get them off. Not wild turkeys. So thanks you guys for all that you do.
Kevin Norman representing Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife. Troy came down with the gombo, so here I am. SFW supports the division's proposal with 2 exceptions. We'd like to see a metric added to help determine if the plan is accomplishing its purpose for both the landowners and the sportsmen. And also, SFW would like to recommend adopting some kind of physical count or formula to determine permit number, something similar to what Nevada does, where they actually go out and count to see what animals are on the landscape and on these private lands. SFW would also like to recommend that after the final RAC, the plan go back to the committee for one final meeting to take into consideration some of these metrics and formulas we talk about could take more time than the RAC would allow to figure out if that's a good idea or not. I think this is a small ask to give those people's voices who commented at the RACs validity and meaning. We fully understand the important role of private property plays into wildlife, and having said that, the real value of these permits is the ability to hunt public land. The overwhelming majority of the permits take animals on public land. Because of that, there are certain concessions to ensure it's fair to the general public. Thank you for your time.
That's it for our public comments, and thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your passion and your desire to affect change and be part of the process. I know it's a commitment to make the drive to come, and I appreciate it. I do have, before I start the RAC comments, I did receive a letter from Mark Hill. He's the president of the Book Cliff Landowner Association. I spoke with him on the phone as well. I apologize. I had no paper in my printer. I had to steal something from my kids to just get one copy, so nobody else has a copy. And if I'll pass this letter around, you can skim it. It's fairly short. He just sent me an email. I'll give the highlights of it, and then I'll just pass it around the table. You guys can look at it if you want. So Mark Hill owns and operates Lazy 3X Ranches located in the Book Cliffs. He's the largest landowner in the Book Cliffs Landowner Association. And he is basically in strong opposition to this. He indicated to me that he hadn't been told about the changes until like mid-April, is what he told me on the phone. And I have no way to know whether that was accurate or not, but based upon what I'm hearing here tonight, that's probably accurate. And he feels that the division has lost sight of the process of what the original intent was. And again, I'm not advocating for him. I just told him I would go ahead and read his letter and go over it because he couldn't make it tonight. And the gist of it is he had a lot of concern about liability if he's forced to allow public hunters onto his property. And he told me emphatically that he would not be allowing public hunters onto his property, and he would opt out of the Landowner Association and this program if this proposal went through. And that's about the gist of it. And I'll pass this around. You guys can read it, look at it. And with that, I will open this to comments from the RAC.
Mr. Chair, would it be possible for me to just give some clarification on some of those?
Absolutely, please do.
I appreciate it. First, one of Bob's things that he says was if there's bad actors. I think the way Bob said it was the intent of what's written, that if there's bad actors in a LOA, that it's not necessarily that we're trying to shut down that LOA. It's more that that specific landowner would be excluded. Where it may be a little bit more difficult is if that dropped them below the 50% percentage. We would at that point in time have to deal with that. But yeah, the intent's not if there's one landowner that is a bad actor to shut down the entire LOA. It's been brought up here a few times, but I just want to reiterate that we have a lot of different programs to work with people. This landowner association program is a way, as was mentioned by Diamond Mountain, that we don't pay on rangeland. So it's a huge benefit to be part of this program, to be able to sell a voucher and actually get compensated for that rangeland. We see that, there's other landowners that aren't part of an LOA that don't get any compensation. I want to touch on the private lands. We're not taking away any private lands rights. This is a completely voluntary program. If public access is not something that you would want to allow, then we are very open to work with you and work with any of them in any of the other programs that fit, that they're willing to work with us in. This is one where I understand the hesitation there, but there's another side that the public access for them is very important, to be able to gain that. If vouchers are being given up and permits out of the draw are being given up, that's the ask in return. Otherwise, I guess we can find other ways to work with them. And this was kind of clarified, but I just want to reiterate, Diamond Mountain was involved in this from the very beginning. We had over a year of meetings, so it's, I guess, a little bit difficult for me to have them say that they didn't know till 2 months ago, when their president was involved from the very beginning of this process. I think this whole process has shown to me that we probably need a little more organization in the landowner association program. And part of that, I would say, is one of the proposals in the new program is to have an annual president's meeting. I think that'll go a long way to put them in contact with each other, but also for us to have contact with them and that we can get on the same page. So yeah, those are just the things I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Thanks, Chad.
Can we ask a question after all those comments?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Ask your questions away.
I guess I just needed to have some clarification on when the public hunters, draw the number that then would, I guess, allow access to the private land. What is that typical process, and how is the landowner given notice, or does the hunter have to ask permission? Can you just speak to that again?
Yeah, that would be something. So the draw will be happening in May with the new thing. So by the end of May. So in June, we would reach out to both the landowner president and to the hunters that drew, and notify both parties that the hunter, you've drawn this permit. This is a map of the lands that are enrolled in the LOA. And to the president of the landowner association, this is the person that drew this. If they reach out to you, it is required for you to give them free access. And as we've discussed, that access can have some stipulations to it, but for sure hunting access.
But the hunter is responsible to reach out to the landowner prior to going hunting.
Oh yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Can I ask more questions? Is this would take effect like immediately?
No.
Or is this for 2023?
Yeah, so if this passes, we have renewals in the summer of 2023, but those renewals take effect in 2024.
Okay.
So we did a 3-year COR with all these landowner associations, and we would honor that 3-year commitment with them.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions for you, Chad. Diamond Ranch stated that they would never allow public hunters to hunt on their land, just, if they're randomly selected. How would that affect that unit? I mean, I know that those tags are taken away from the total number of public draw tags that are available. Does that mean that that number of tags would then be available to draw? Or does taking away the ability to hunt on those acres reduce the number of tags that would be allotted for that area?
No, I would say that those would go back into the public draw. Yeah. And like I said, we'd be willing, I mean, if that was a choice that if this proposal passes and that's the choice that they make, everybody's got choices, right? If you don't want to allow public on your land, then that's your choice. Would respect that, but we'd work with them too and try to find ways to make it so it's more palatable for them. Whether that's changing hunting strategies or whatever we would need to do to help out there, we would be open to those conversations.
Okay, thank you. Then one other question. If this does go back to committee, let's say that gets moved on and approved, that it goes back to committee with the changes, as has been suggested by SFW and other landowner groups here, would that then have to go back through the RAC process, or would those changes just be say, okay, go ahead, could take this back to committee, we're cool with whatever changes you make, and then take it to the wildlife board? What would be the process?
Yeah, that's one of the things that I struggle with it is if there were changes, then none of those changes went through the RAC process. It wasn't heard. To clarify on that too, this is the process that we've used. So we have committees, we have surveys, we do a lot of investigative stuff to gather information. We form a recommendation. That committee helps us with that recommendation. But at this point, this is our recommendation. The committee has done their job. They gave us the input that we wanted. It's our recommendation at this point going forward. We're comfortable with the rule as it's written. We're comfortable with going forward with it. Yeah, I think throwing it back to committee can cause a little bit some sticky issues, I guess in my mind, as far as if anything changed. I think there would be a legit complaint of those changes didn't get heard by the RACs, just the board.
Can I ask one more? Sorry, don't mean to cut anybody off. If they were to pull from the landowners association or pull out of that and use other methods like depredation, could there be detriment to the deer herd up there by, a killing of a lot of does or something like that? Is that a concern to the DWR? I mean, what concerns, I guess, maybe my question is better asked like this. What concerns would the DWR have if they were to pull out? What would be some of the negative effects?
I mean, there could be a lot of change. I don't know. That's a really hard question to answer because I don't know on concerns, but we have a lot of different management strategies that we can use. We can change those management strategies if need be to fit what the landowners out there will tolerate and what they can handle. So, I mean, if it came down to it, potentially, I mean, you could go as far as turning it into a general season unit that has opportunity rather than a limited entry. If that would be a potential. I'm not saying that that's what would happen. We could, like, if there's still the tolerance there, we could still operate it as a limited entry unit. We could change age objectives. We could change population objectives. So there's just so many possibilities that that's a hard one for me to answer with that. But yeah, and just to touch on your previous question, I would say, as we're talking about committees and reform, getting back together, I think we have proposals. We have the proposals here. It would be my suggestion if we want to see changes that the proposals get made now. That this is the time that the RACs make decisions, or not decisions, but you make recommendations to the wildlife board. If there's part of this rule that you want to see played out a little bit different, I would say that this is the time to make those motions and to make those changes and recommendations to the wildlife board.
That's what I was just going to say. I'm listening to you guys say whatever needs to be done. We should make recommendations if we feel strongly or differently than what the division's proposal is. We should make those recommendations here in the form of motions to send to the board, not, I would disagree with going back to the committee because I think you just stretch things out. You create more problems than you solve by doing that. But we've received some input. We've received the positions from different landowner associations. We know where they stand on it and we represent them as well as the public. So, we need to weigh that out. And if we see things that we think could be different, that might be better if if you have a better idea, something that's been presented here to us tonight that's a concern. Like we may want to ask the division to add language in there specifically exempting landowners from liability for the hunters. I mean, it's already in state law more or less. And it's my understanding in the United States, anybody can bring a lawsuit against anybody else for any reason, and it's up to a judge to decide whether or not you have standing. Is that correct as an attorney? Yeah. Okay. That's, yeah, it costs money, but it can be done, But that's my comment. I think there's good in the plan. There's some things that if I could wave a magic wand, I would probably do different, but I don't know everything and I don't know every situation. And something I see as I look at these letters and listening to the discussion here tonight is a lot of the landowner associations are very different. Things are very different on the Diamond Mountain than what they are in the Book Cliffs. And the Book Cliffs Landowner Association is, the private land in the Book Cliffs is a tiny sliver of the overall land mass out there. It's primarily public land. Most of the public land is like a 50-50 split between state and BLM, different agencies in the state. So, in that situation, there's probably very few of the animals on those vouchers that are ever taken on the private land. They're all taken on public. Many of them are taken 60 or 70 miles from the nearest private piece of the landowner association. On Diamond Mountain, it's probably quite the opposite. You probably have a large number of those animals that are actually on your property all the time. So, like Chad pointed out, some of those situations like that where you have a huge piece of contiguous land, maybe the best option for you is a CWMU. You end up with a lot more permits that way. But it's a different set of rules too. So I'm done yakking.
With this
Any other-
discussion, if it's okay, can I ask how this
Yeah.
has gone in the other RACs?
Yeah, Central RAC is where we started out. It passed 7-1. Well, I don't know if it was 7, but there was one dissenting, but it did pass as presented. Northern region, it also passed as presented. That was a tie that was broken by the chair. I don't know if I can add into that, but it was my feeling like I'll just say that some of the opposing votes were that they wanted to see those, like SFW talked about, those the criteria to look at if it was working. That was why they voted no. So for what that's worth, last night in the Southern region, they voted unanimously to put it back to the committee.
Several things come to mind here. Number one, I think we all understand, the stance of the private landowners. It is private land. We respect that. We know there's a lot of work that went into that. That being said, those tags that are being given to those landowners are public tags. And just last year, we had over 70,000 people apply for elk tags in the public drawing. We gladly, take those 30 elk tags back and put in that drawing. But I think it's important that we remember that this is a voluntary program. They're not forced to accept that program. One thing that was said earlier that, I believe you alluded to the fact that the majority of the animals are on your private land. If that's the case, maybe that option 2 is a better choice. Option 2, you don't have to put the near as much public access, and you can hunt all that public land. If that's where the animals are, maybe that's a good option for you. Again, that's another voluntary program. As far as the landowners and LOAs that say they didn't know about this, I think it's unfair to blame that on the division. The LOAs had a representative on that committee. If I was a representative of the LOA, I would certainly hope that he would have reached out to the LOAs. I think there was probably some neglect on your representative. That's just the way I see it from the outside looking in. I really have some concern with LOAs who want to take those public tags that are good for the entire unit and not allow public access. It's kind of like saying that, okay, we're going to let you sell those tags and they're good for public lands, but we're going to restrict that to this 5-acre parcel down in the corner of the public land. That's not right. And so, there's a lot of options out there. It is voluntary. I feel very strongly that sending it back to the committee is a mistake. The committee has put in a lot of hours. I think this is a good compromise. Is it perfect? Certainly not. But I think it's a good compromise. It represents, there's options that represent the landowners. There's also fairness to the public because that's where the tags come from. I do really think that there needs to be metrics to measure the success of the program. I believe the Northern RAC voted to accept the proposal with the caveat that it'd be revisited in 3 years. Typically, rules are reviewed every 5 years. I did talk with Kyle to see if it could be done earlier. He did tell me it could be reviewed earlier, couldn't just go over the 5 years. I think that's a good thing, but without a way to measure the success of it, what good is reviewing it later on? So we got to know if the system, if the program's working, but for both parties, both the landowners and the public. So I do feel strongly that there needs to be ways to measure the success of the program. That's my comments.
I just want to comment that after hearing taking it back to the committee, it just seems pretty pretentious for us as a group that hasn't spent all the hours in the committee to say that we know better, so to speak. I think it was good to hear what the public had to say. It opened my eyes to different perspectives, but to me, I just think the amount of work and the broad perspective that was tried to be included with it, it just, I don't feel confident enough to make a decision saying it's not right. I just feel like they've put that work in. So I think we need to, in my opinion, we need to just respect what the work that's been put into it.
You've heard a lot of concern about, the bad actors or people who may do things against the landowner's wishes when they are granted permission. I wonder if there would be a way that something like that could be addressed quickly, rather than having, it's tough. The landowner's going to want to go out there and say, look, you can't do that. And then if it happens again, what happens at that point? How can they kick off that bad person? But then at the same time, how can you make sure that that doesn't get abused and say, oh, well, he drove a tire track off the road, so he's out, Something to help the landowner out in that regard would be useful, I think.
Any other comments? If not, we'll entertain motions.
I'd like to make a motion to accept the landowner rule amendments as presented by the DWR.
Have a motion by Charles to accept as presented. Do we have a second?
Charles, would you be open to any type of an amendment to include a metrics to measure the success of it?
I guess, how would that work? How would that look?
Way I see it, the division can put that together. I don't have anything specific, but I know that there needs to be ways to measure if it's working for the private landowners. I think that there's measures within the CWMU program that can be adopted where there's reporting. CWMUs, they turn in reports talking about reporting on the projects that are done, any habitat work, those type of things that benefit wildlife. There also needs to be measures of the access, how that works, to make sure that the public is also, that it's working for the public as well. So I think that's an important aspect of it.
One thing that I thought of is certainly they went into this plan with criteria, success criteria, like, okay, these are the things that we're going to try to do as we rewrite this plan. What if they looked at those very criteria in 3 years to see how successful they were?
Okay, I'd like to amend my motion to make sure the DWR looks back and make sure the objectives of the original committee are being met.
We have a motion by Charles to accept the division's proposal as presented with the caveat that they want revisit this and make sure that it's meeting the intended goals. Does that pretty much sum it up, Charles?
Yeah, yep.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Eric. Any discussion on the motion? If not,
I'll say one thing to that. I like the motion as it was restructured because I think I respect as much as anybody does private property and for a lot of reasons, some being that I've owned some in the past and I've had wildlife impact and never felt like it was enough. But on the other hand, it's a struggle I also respect the fact that landowners can opt in or opt out to this. And the small guys like the Book Cliff gentleman, he's impacted more than just a few elk or deer tearing down his fences, because sometimes his grazing rights and that sort of thing get adjusted accordingly when it's not his fault, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But I do like the motion as we visit it and make further studies on it.
any other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll take a vote. Scoop,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Darren,
Yes.
Stephen,
Yes.
Brad,
Yes.
Lynn,
Yes.
Sunshine,
Yes.
Dana,
Yes.
and Charles.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Except Dana.
I actually prepared for that. I have my notes right here.
Okay, all right. Thank you, everyone. And again, thanks for all of your input. Thank you to those that drove and spent time coming. We have one more agenda item. We have just it's informational on the Gordon Creek WMA. And did everyone watch that?
Of course.
I don't see Cade here, so. Oh, there he is. He was hiding. Mhm. Any questions for Cade on the work that's going on at the Gordon Creek WMA?
I guess I had a question. I saw in the plan that DWR would issue a special use permit for groups over 25. I was just curious how often, I mean, is that a common practice?
I've never seen it happen.
Okay. All right. Well, I was just going to ask how it works.
Or on the line. She knows more than I do.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Akita Hansen. I'm the Habitat Program Manager. Yeah, we very, very rarely get special use permits. I think we've had one time from the Army wanting to do some training out there. But other than that, we really haven't seen any, but it's just a pretty simple process. I think we have like 30 to 45 days to respond to those, but it's very rare. We do have another special use permit coming on a different WMA. It's not necessarily for groups of over 25, but it's for a film type situation. But yeah, very rare that we get them, but we do process those through our Salt Lake office.
And so like if you do get them in Gordon Creek, which has mixed land ownership, do you just mention to them that they may need to talk to the other like landowners like BLM?
Yeah.
Or do they? Okay.
Yeah.
Is that something that you would like to see more of? Does it benefit the WMA or is it, I'm just curious. I mean, because I honestly, I don't think a lot of people know that that's even an option. If it's something you wanted, I think, a little bit of advertisement. If it's not something you want, obviously, then you don't want to advertise, but just curious.
Yeah, typically, with wildlife management areas as a state, those are designed to benefit wildlife. And so we aren't necessarily a multiple use agency on our lands. And so anything that happens on our lands, especially those with federal aid dollars tied to them, should be in the best interest of wildlife of the state. And so it's not something we necessarily advertise for like recreation groups or anything like that. But if we see a benefit to wildlife, or the public that would be benefiting from an activity that would encourage use of wildlife, either through hunting or just through wildlife viewing, then that's something we would support, but it's not something we necessarily advertise.
From the Forest Service, I know you guys have been a partner and allowed range permittees to graze that in the past, and when there's been a fire or some other situation. And so from our agency, appreciate that help and support and what you guys have done in that regard. So.
It's just an informational, so after questions or comments.
And is there any other questions? Well, I guess we have no other questions. You're off the hook. All right, we have nothing else on the agenda, so
I move that we adjourn.
got a motion to adjourn. Seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're out of here. I always wanted to do that.